So you buy a gallon of gas, right?
Yeah.
And you just trust the pump.
Right. You assume a gallon is actually a gallon.
Exactly. Or like you buy a pound of coffee, you trust the scale at the store. I mean, our entire daily lives run on this invisible assumption that a standard is, a standard.
Yeah, that the measuring stick doesn't change depending on who's holding it.
Right. But the biblical study we are diving into today argues that when it comes to the ultimate nature of reality, like how we measure truth and authority, humanity's scales are just completely rigged.
Oh, absolutely rigged.
Like every institution is basically using a different tape measure.
And that is really the core premise of this incredibly dense transcript we're looking at today. It takes these ancient texts, tracing all the way from Genesis to Revelation, and treats them, well, not as like isolated moral allegories,
Not just nice little stories.
Exactly. It treats them as a cohesive, highly analytical schematic. The text diagnoses this fundamental crisis of measurement in the world and then introduces a singular, honestly, kind of shocking solution.
Yeah, it really is.
It focuses on this ancient symbol known as the rod or the staff. In the source material, it's represented by the Chinese character zong.
And the diagnosis part of this really starts with this metaphor of deceitful scales.
Right.
The source poses this really fascinating question. Like, what happens when you put the Word of God on one side of a balance and then the people who claim to hold it on the other side?
And, spoiler alert, it doesn't go well.
No, not at all. According to this analysis, humanity simply does not pass the test. Our spiritual weight is fundamentally off.
The text actually describes the result of this imbalance as a global famine. But, and I think this is important, it's careful to strip away the physical implications of that word.
Okay, so not a literal food shortage.
Right. We aren't looking at a lack of resources or wheat or whatever. The famine is a starvation of objective truth. Because when a society lacks a definitive standard, like a true scale, this spiritual and intellectual starvation is just inevitable.
Because every claim to truth basically becomes entirely subjective.
Exactly. Everything becomes just an opinion.
And the source gets surprisingly specific here. Like, it points the finger directly at our most prestigious institutions.
Oh, it doesn't hold back.
No. It brings up the rivalries of, Harvard versus Yale or Oxford versus Cambridge alongside all these different elite seminaries. And just to be clear, we are just imparting what the source material claims here, not endorsing one over the other.
Right. We're just analyzing the argument.
But the text argues that these places, they all have access to the exact same raw data.
Yeah.
They read the same historical text, the same biblical canon, yet they all somehow output these completely conflicting interpretations of reality.
Because the standard they use to measure that data is different for each of them.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source labels these differing institutional standards as deceitful scales or unfair weights.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism. The text implies that human intellect, no matter how refined or, historically prestigious it is, it literally cannot generate its own objective standard. Yeah. If the definitive divine standard hasn't been explicitly granted to you, then whatever analytical framework you build is, by definition, a counterfeit.
So it's like, I picture it like trying to build this massive, complex skyscraper. But every single carpenter, architect, and engineer who shows up to the job site brought a tape measure that defines an inch totally differently.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Like the guy framing the walls has a shorter inch than the guy pouring the foundation.
Yeah.
You literally cannot build a structure that sustains its own weight.
They would just fall apart.
The moment you start adding any pressure, the whole thing collapses into chaos because there is no localized agreement on reality.
And that analogy perfectly captures the philosophical weight of the text's argument. Without a singular, unified measuring stick, you're trapped in this cycle where one carpenter is just endlessly arguing with another carpenter over whose subjective tape measure is better.
Right, and they're both wrong.
Exactly. The text argues humanity is currently trapped in this exact cycle. And because human scales are inherently broken, a true standard has to be introduced from the outside.
Which I guess brings us to the central symbol of this deep dive, the rod.
Yes. And the source takes an absolute sledgehammer to our preconceived notions of what this rod actually is.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because when we hear rod or staff in like a theological context, we almost always default to the pastoral imagery.
Right. The shepherd.
Yeah, we think of the gentle shepherd on a grassy hill, leaning on this wooden crook, maybe using it to, softly nudge a wandering sheep back to the flock.
But the text aggressively redefines this object. It asks you to look at the rod by comparing it to things like a military officer's baton of absolute authority.
A bit more intense.
Or to the staff Moses used to bring entire empires to their knees. And then, and this is a brilliant cross-cultural pivot, it references Sun Wukong,
the Monkey King from Chinese mythology.
Yes. It compares the rod to his legendary golden cudgel.
Which totally shifts the mental framing. Like, a golden cudgel that can literally expand to hold up the ocean is a far cry from a gentle walking stick.
Just a bit, yeah.
So the text then defines this rod primarily as the literal word of God. But it absolutely refuses to let it be this passive object of comfort. It immediately points to Psalm 23.
Right, the famous one.
We all know the imagery of walking through the valley of the shadow of death. But the source equates this valley directly to a literal manifestation of hell.
And it asks this very mechanical question of that passage, like, why is the speaker fearless in hell?
It is a good question.
The traditional assumption is, while the shepherd's rod is this comforting symbol of God's presence, like a warm blanket. But the source argues the fearlessness comes from what the rod actually does. It's a weapon.
Yeah, the text actually kind of mocks the modern interpretation of comfort here. It points out that there are legions of people today who claim to possess this divine rod, yet they're just terrified of everything.
Oh, completely.
They isolate themselves. They're afraid to even step foot in a different temple. They run away at the very first sign of philosophical conflict. The transcript essentially asks this blunt question. If you hold the ultimate standard of the universe in your hands, why are you hiding?
To clarify the mechanics of this weapon, the text pulls in the prophets Jeremiah and Isaiah.
Okay.
So Jeremiah 23 describes the word as a hammer that shatters rocks into pieces.
No.
And Isaiah 11 describes it as the breath or the rod from the mouth that strikes the earth and slays the wicked.
That is definitely not a walking stick.
No. The theological logic here is that true comfort cannot exist in a vacuum of passivity. If you are navigating this landscape of deceit and death, true comfort only comes from holding an unbreakable standard of truth capable of aggressively shattering falsehoods.
I mean, it makes sense. A fragile reed isn't going to help you against a rock. You need the hammer. But the source makes this surprising pivot right about here.
Right, because a hammer, no matter how heavy it is, can't swing itself.
Exactly. It requires a hand to hold it.
So the text personifies the standard. The rod is revealed to be a metaphor for a leader or a specific person who is wielding the truth.
Oh, that's fascinating.
For instance, it analyzes the dynamic between Moses and Aaron. It suggests that Aaron actually functioned as Moses's verbal staff. Or, zooming out, that Moses himself operated as the staff for the entire Israelite nation.
So truth, in this framework, isn't just this abstract concept floating around in the ether.
No, it has to be physically carried and wielded by an agent.
And this leads to what I think is easily the most striking and honestly bizarre observation in the entire transcript. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, the nightstand part.
Yes. The source zeroes in on the story of Moses and his staff. So when Moses is actively gripping the rod, operating under divine instruction, the rod is this instrument of immense holy power. It parts the Red Sea, it dictates reality to Pharaoh, but the text highlights what happens when Moses puts the rod down.
Right.
It turns into a snake.
A literal venomous threat.
Wait, I have to push back on the source's framing here for a second. In the Exodus narrative, isn't God the one who explicitly commands Moses to throw the staff on the ground?
Yes, he does.
So if it's divine command, how does the text logically frame this as a warning against putting the truth down?
Well, that is the exact tension the source is trying to highlight. The text argues that the divine command to throw the staff down was a deliberate, controlled demonstration of this terrifying spiritual mechanic.
Okay, so showing him how it works.
Exactly. God was showing Moses the inherent nature of the standard when it is detached from divine reliance. The lesson is that divine truth is not this autonomous, perfectly safe object.
Wow.
It's only holy when it is actively tethered to the divine will through a person. The moment you release it, like the moment you try to let the standard exist independently of active reliance, it reverts to the nature of the serpent. It becomes deceptive and toxic.
The transcript actually makes a joke about this, which I loved. It paints this picture of Moses coming home after a long day of parting seas and doing miracles, and he just tosses his rod on the nightstand next to his bed.
And suddenly there's a deadly cobra in his bedroom.
Right. Like, you can't just casually leave ultimate truth lying around like your car keys.
And the broader application there is profound. You might be thinking, oh, if I learn this truth, if I acquire the standard, then I'm safe. But the text argues the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah. If you take theological truth or divine standards and just put them on a shelf if you memorize them but you cease to actively engage and rely on them, they will bite you.
Wow, okay.
They become a source of religious pride or legalism or just self-deception. The truth only remains true when it's actively in motion, being wielded.
But humanity is constantly looking for, an easier thing to hold. Because that sounds exhausting. So the text contrasts this volatile, demanding divine rod with what it calls Pharaoh's rod.
Right. Pharaoh functions in this text as the ultimate stand-in for the secular world, for systems of worldly power and physical security. And the text pulls from Isaiah 36 to describe relying on Pharaoh as leaning your weight on a splintered reed.
Oh, that visceral image. You lean on it for support, and instead of holding you up, it just snaps and drives a massive splinter right through your hand.
It actively harms you when you trust it.
Yet, the psychological temptation to lean on that broken reed is just overwhelming for people. The source analyzes the Israelites wandering in the wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, they are holding the ultimate standard. They're seeing literal miracles, but the wilderness is harsh.
It requires total, exhausting reliance on God just for daily survival.
So they start looking backward. The text specifically highlights their craving for the garlic and meat of Egypt.
Right, they miss the predictability of slavery.
Which is wild to think about.
It is,
Yeah.
because Pharaoh's broken standard offers something the divine standard doesn't, which is immediate, tangible gratification.
A full belly today.
Even if the cost is total bondage to a deceitful system, the source is really highlighting this universal human mechanism. We often prefer the familiar, painful splinter of a false reality over the terrifying freedom of the wilderness.
But relying on that false rod ultimately ensures your destruction.
Exactly.
So if the true rod is this volatile, powerful standard that has to be wielded by a person, what is the ultimate goal here? The text actually fast forwards through the whole biblical timeline, landing in the book of Revelation to show us the final evolution of this rod.
And it splits into two incredibly specific forms,
Right.
the golden reed and the iron rod.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, how do these work?
Well, these two symbols operate as the dual, simultaneous functions of absolute truth at the very end of the narrative. The golden reed appears in Revelation chapters 11 and 21. It is explicitly a measuring rod, but its purpose is entirely constructive.
Constructive, okay.
It's used to meticulously measure and rebuild the temple, but only after the outer courts, which represent the corrupted old systems, have been completely discarded.
But why gold? Like the text specifies gold, not wood or bone or iron for this part.
Because in biblical typology, gold represents the divine nature. It doesn't tarnish, it doesn't rust, and its value is intrinsic. By using a golden reed, the text is saying that the new foundation of reality must be measured by a standard that is entirely incorruptible and divine.
I see.
You cannot rebuild a true structure using the broken tape measures of human philosophy that we discussed earlier. The golden reed is truth measuring what is inherently worthy of existence.
Okay, but then we get to the iron rod, which is found in Revelation chapters 2 and 12. And the imagery here is, well, it's pretty violent.
Oh, very.
We read about a woman clothed in the sun who is given wings to flee into the wilderness away from a literal dragon. And she gives birth to a male child, an overcomer, who is given this iron rod to rule nations.
Right.
And he doesn't just, politely rule them. He uses the iron rod to shatter his enemies like potter's clay vessels.
It's a very stark contrast to the golden reed.
It almost feels perfectly surgical, though. You need the scalpel to violently excise the disease, which is the iron rod, before you can use the sutures to rebuild the healthy tissue, the golden reed.
Right.
You can't just stitch gold over a decaying tumor. The iron has to shatter the clay first.
And that surgical analogy is exactly how the text structures this theology. Why iron? Because iron is unyielding. It has zero flexibility.
None at all.
When an inflexible standard of absolute truth strikes a fragile, human-made reality, which is represented by those clay vessels, the clay shatters. The source argues you literally cannot establish the divine reality of the golden reed without first utilizing the iron rod to demolish the false, deceitful scales that humanity built its empires on.
Now, to prove this isn't just some random apocalyptic fantasy novel vision, the source traces the linguistic DNA of this iron rod all the way back to the very first book of the Bible.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
Right. It anchors the imagery in Genesis 49, where there is this prophecy stating that the scepter, the ruling rod, will not depart from the tribe of Judah until a figure named Shiloh comes.
The mechanism of how the text connects these dots is honestly a masterclass in biblical analysis. So Shiloh is this ancient Hebrew word that has puzzled scholars for centuries regarding its exact translation.
It's kind of a mystery word.
Exactly. But this source links the Genesis prophecy directly to the Gospel of John, chapter 9.
Oh, that's the story where Jesus heals a blind man, right? By telling him to wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam.
Yes. And in the Greek text of John, the author explicitly translates the name Siloam for the reader. He writes that Siloam means the sent one.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the source uses this linguistic bridge to argue that Shiloh and Siloam are actually the exact same prophetic thread. Therefore, the ultimate authority, the eternal scepter, belongs exclusively to the sent one.
The divine entity.
Right. And by extension, in Revelation, that iron rod of authority is delegated to those who overcome the dragon and align themselves with the sent one.
So the text basically treats the entire Bible as this intricate, hyperlinked ecosystem. Like the scepter in Genesis is the staff of Moses, which is the hammer of Jeremiah, which becomes the iron rod of Revelation.
It is a cohesive, terrifyingly consistent standard of measurement just moving through history.
Which brings this entire cosmic historical analysis crashing right down onto the listener's shoulders. The text ends by focusing on how this standard operates on a micro level, like for you and me.
Yeah.
It points to the book of Leviticus, chapter 27, verse 32, introducing this concept of passing under the rod.
And this is where the theology becomes a very individual audit. So in ancient shepherding, a shepherd would literally lower his rod across the gate of the pen.
Okay.
As the sheep passed under the rod one by one, he would physically inspect them, count them, and separate them. He used the standard to divide the healthy from the sick, the true flock from the impostors.
The text is incredibly stark here. It states that at the culmination of reality, every single person will pass under this exact standard.
Yeah, there's no group grading.
No. The universe isn't just going to be generally measured. You are going to be specifically measured. The question the source poses is, when that rod comes down over you, will it recognize the word inside you? Because the sorting is binary. If you don't match the standard, you are rejected.
And this completely dismantles our modern inclination toward relative truth. I mean, we live in a society where we desperately want to grade our own homework.
Oh, absolutely.
We want to say, well, I'm a good person based on the criteria I have personally defined for myself. But the inescapable conclusion of this transcript is that you do not get to hold the clipboard. You don't get to decide how long an inch is.
You'll get to bring your own tape measure to the final audit.
Exactly. And that highlights the core motivation behind this entire deep theological study. The people analyzing these texts, they aren't doing it for academic trivia. They aren't just trying to win some theological debate at a coffee shop. They are rigorously studying the exact specifications of the divine standard because they understand that knowledge is only valuable when it actually alters your state of being.
It has to change you.
They want to ensure that when they individually pass under that unyielding rod, they are made of gold, not clay.
Wow. Well, we started by looking at a world starving in a famine of truth, relying on deceitful scales and broken systems. We traced how the ultimate standard is personified in a rod that acts as both a weapon to shatter falsehoods and a tool to rebuild reality.
Yeah.
And we saw the dangerous volatility of truth. How failing to actively rely on the divine standard literally turns it into a venomous snake in your own home.
It forces a profound reevaluation of what we consider safe and what we consider true. We discussed the psychological pull of Pharaoh's splintered reed-like, how we so easily trade ultimate truth for the temporary comfort of garlic and meat.
So true.
So if you look at your own life right now, embedded in a society saturated with deceitful scales, from the curated realities of social media algorithms to the completely subjective truths of competing news networks, what is the definitive rod you are leaning your full weight on today? And if you stopped actively relying on it, would it sustain you or would it turn into a snake?
That is a heavy, necessary question to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.